Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this study. It is a gorgeous day out there. Hope you get a chance to really get out and enjoy some of this beautiful weather that we're having. But thank you for taking the time to listen to this study either now or later. As you can see on our screen, we are in Judges chapter 16 and coming to the end of the story of Samson. And again, I wish I could tell you there's going to be a great, wonderful ending, but what we're going to see here is some very interesting verses and words within the verses that I think can teach us a lot about our relationship with God, can teach us a lot about how to keep it fresh and vibrant and not become um, commonplace in our life. And so here's where we start with verse 19. And she made him sleep upon her knees. Remember, this is Delilah, his girlfriend, Philistine girlfriend, and Samson was at her house. She's trying to get him to tell her um, the source of his strength. She feels he's done that. The Philistines have paid her in advance because she really believed this was what the cause was. So she was obviously going to take advantage of this knowledge, made him to sleep on her knees, called for a man. She caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head, and she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. Now, again, a very strange sentence, and we have to go to the Hebrew just to find out a little bit more um, interest here, especially it's just what some of these words can mean. We have a picture in our mind, that Samson was laying on her lap on the couch, and she's stroking his head and makes him fall asleep, and then calls somebody in to cut his hair off. But the Hebrew gives us a little bit different understanding. So here you can see on your screen, this is from Bible Hub. We're looking at the Hebrew words with the English underneath, and we start at verse 19. And this word of lulled him to sleep, you would think this is just a very passive, nice cooing sound, no emotion whatsoever. But the Hebrew has this listed as a verb that's in a PL form, which is the most intense verb form that you can use to express strong intensity. So this was not a, spa type moment of being relaxed and falling asleep. She was desperately working with her hardest to help him to fall asleep. And I find this almost ironic and an oxymoron, I guess, that this word lull to sleep could have an intensive form. Um, there's something going on here that I do not understand. So she lulled him to sleep, but this was in a very strong, intensive form. Maybe it's because she felt the pressure of what was going on and of what was going to happen and the money that she got and what she would do with it. But these are all just conjecture on my part. So she got him to go to sleep. She did not want to move. She didn't want to disturb him. So she called for a guy who was obviously standing in the other room and called for him to come and shave off the 7 locks of his head. And so what we want to do is look at again, even shaving these locks off is in a PL form. So again, very strange to get the understanding of how intense this moment must have been for her. And Samson is asleep. He's totally oblivious to what is happening here, and that this is his demise. This is the Philistines' great victory. Delilah is getting a lot of money from this. She obviously, the guy who's cutting his hair off must have got something from it. And then after the 7 locks of hair were cut off, it says she began to torment him. But this word translated as she began uh, is doesn't translate, and it caught my attention. And it is actually the word halal, which means to bore or pierce. So what was she doing to him at this time that is boring is like boring or piercing him. So if you change, and she began to, and she was boring and piercing him. Um, Again, trying to understand what's happening here. And then, of course, the next word, torment, is also in a PL form. So it's again very strong, intense. What was she saying? What was she doing? There's no indication that what is happening here is causing any understanding of of what is going on. I'm trying to grasp for what words are being said, or what kind of emotions are coming forth. All we know, it is very, very intensive. And so it says she was tormenting him, and then it says his strength left him. What's very interesting are these two words, and left his strength. So let's just click on it and look at it. The strength didn't leave him. The strength, the word is sur, that means it turned aside. It's like the face turned, and this was just his identity, or who he was, leaving him. And that'll make a little more sense as we look at this next word of strength. This is not the normal word for strength either. This is a word translated as a small reptile. This is really weird. I don't understand how this could have these dual meanings, other than if we look at um, deeper into this, it compares it to a force that maybe was something that was brought in through paganistic rituals of little lizards and little things like that. I've seen shows that um, talk about the spirits being in this little animal and so forth. And what it's trying to give an indication is that this wasn't his force that left. It was a, I'm sorry, it wasn't his strength that left. It was a force within him that left. It was a presence, like an aura about him, that disappeared, and he didn't even know it. We get to verse 20. It says, she called out and woke him up and said, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. But prior to this, she was tormenting him and afflicting him in such that his strength left, but he's still asleep. Again, very challenging to understand. And so she was able to wake him. He awoke from his sleep and said, "Oh, nothing's happening, nothing's different. I'm going to go out before and shake myself as other times." And here's the sad commentary. It says, "But he did not know that his strength," actually, it says he did not know that Yahweh had departed from him. He didn't know that God, and again, here is this word sar, which is to turn aside. So it's not just the departing, it's that God's mercy has turned from him, as God's face has turned away from him. This is a very common euphemism in the Bible of showing God's pleasure, where his face would shine upon you, or his displeasure, where his face would turn away from you. And so that's what's hidden here within these Hebrew words, that he didn't know that God's mercy, again, this is Yahweh, which is the connotating the merciful, compassionate side of God, had departed from him. And of course, many messages could be built upon this as to how not to treat our relationship with God so lightly and so frivolously that it becomes commonplace, and that we don't even know when we're in it and we don't know when we're out of it. Um, and so we lose the wonder and the awe and the reverence, and to not treat our relationship with God so lightly that we lose those things. Again, very, very sad story here. And then, of course, as we go on, here's what the Philistines did. They took him and they put out his eyes. Obviously, again, not a very pleasant experience. Let's see if this gives us any indication as to how they did it. The word says that they bored, picked, or dug out, translated as gouged. Um, any way you want to say that. it doesn't feel good. And so they put out his eyes. They brought him down to the city of Gaza. They put shackles on him and put him at a grinding wheel, the kind that normally you'd have a donkey or an animal going around and around in a circle grinding this. And it says sometimes prisoners did that, is what we get the indication. But again, what's another interesting thought here is that his hair began to grow back. And whether Samson realized it and the enemy didn't, or neither one of them realized it, it's has enough meaning here to be pointed out in the Bible that his hair began to grow back again, and that his long hair was the source of his strength. But yet we know that God was the source of his strength. So it's somewhat challenging to just understand what this is meaning. Was God's mercy coming back to him as his hair grew? Was God's mercy independent of, um, you know, his long hair, that it would come, and that God's promise was that if his hair was long, his strength would always be there? There's something that is yet to be understood. Also noticing the intensity of the words here, a PL for hair growing again. How can that be an intense occupation or an intense action? Um, Obviously, Samson must have begun to feel something and knew that something was happening in his strength. Maybe it was easier to push the wheel around. And how long does it take for hair to grow? Um, I know I get my hair cut, every month, and it grows, what, a quarter inch or something, and it has to, be cut. So what kind of growth did he have? What kind of growth did he know before, or have before he began to know that his strength was coming? We don't know what amount of time passed, but we do see in verse 23 that the Philistines brought together a big party to rejoice to their um, false god Dagon, which is the name for a fish. A dog is actually a fish, and so this is actually a symbol of a fish. So again, strange things that are hard to understand, but they worshiped the fish god. And so they wanted to celebrate the triumph over Samson. And so they brought him in, giving Dagon all of the praise and whatever. And so we get down to verse 25. It says that they were drunken and they wanted to make sport of Samson. So they called for him to come. They stationed him. And this little boy that was walking with him Samson told him, "Put me between the pillars of this large building and let me feel them in my hands, the ones that support all the weight of the temple, so I can lean on them." And verse 27 said the temple was full of men and women, and there were about 3,000 of them there watching Samson being tormented. And verse 28 is where we wrap this up. It says that he called upon Yahweh, which was the merciful, compassionate side of God, saying, Adonai Yahweh, so Lord God, Lord Yahweh, remember me, I pray, and strengthen me just this once. And look why he wants to be strengthened, that I may take vengeance for them putting out my eyes. Again, this I understand, that his eyes were meaningful to him. But what we see here is a complete lack of any spirituality, complete misunderstanding of what God's purpose and plan was for him. He wanted to be avenged of his eyes. He didn't want to do God's will. He didn't want to fit into God's plan. And so there's just, again, so much that can be said here about what was the real purpose that God gave him his strength. Is it possible that what Samson understood in what he was doing, he never understood what God was wanting to do. He never understood what God's real purpose and plan was. And this kind of shook me, and these thoughts that go through my mind is it possible that I could be, or we as a people sometimes think we are accomplishing something, but in reality, God has a complete another plan that we're not even cognizant of, that we're doing something based upon our own knowledge, totally ignorant to what God's real plan and purpose was. It seems here that God used this for his purpose, even though Samson was seemingly clueless as to why his strength was there and what he was trying to achieve. And even in the end, he was only thinking about himself. He only wanted to be avenged for himself. And so as we go and finish, he grabbed them, he pushed on them, he said, "Let me die with the Philistines." He pushed with all his might, and the temple um, that was there uh, fell, and they all were killed. So it says that the dead he slew at the time of his death were more than which he slew in his life. And of course, his brother and all the house of his father came down and took him, um, dug him up out of the rubble, and buried him next to his dad. And it says that for 20 years, Samson judged Israel. So again, a very sad ending to the story, but yet so many nuggets of wisdom and so many nuggets of thought process of helping us to think and causing us to look at ourselves and look at situations and try to make applications to see if anything applies to us here. I found many of them, so I trust that it was a blessing to you, that you are strengthened and encouraged by it, and I so appreciate you taking the time to either be here live in person or listen to it later on. So God bless you and have a great week. Bye bye.